To my fellow Peruvians, you know what album I'm talking about, but maybe not the backstory. But also, to my fellow non-Peruvians, let me tell you a tale of not just any regular album, but about a Christmas album recorded by a local school choir far from the capital, led by a priest who only recently transferred to the school. How the recording became the anthem of Peruvian Christmas even over half a century later, and the series of events that unfolded, which will culminate in a controversial and sad ending for the choir and the priest. I hope you enjoy. The first Venetian priests to arrive in Chiclayo, Peru in 1945 were Rodolfo Garro and Ignacio Lanchetas, with the school being officially founded in 1948. The school existed for several years, but nothing really happened for a while, and there's practically no recording of its history. But nothing notable happened on the timeline until 1965, when a certain man joined the school. On a regular school afternoon, just a few days into the new school year, students lined up outside of the teacher's room, small groups entering periodically as the previous group shuffled out. As they made their way into the room, there stood a priest. Long face, bulging eyes, and a small body with a tuning fork in hand. And he started the routine as he had with the previous groups. The priest called them up one by one to the desk where he stood up to perform the same action with each one of them. He tapped the tuning fork on the desk and he began singing some basic musical notes. Each student then repeated the same phrase a few times. And that was the assessment. Select students were then separated from their groups, and the process repeated over and over again, from the second grade all the way to the fifth. Only a few were selected, with some classes having no one selected at all. But by the end, 15 students remained. And so that was the formation of the Coral Infantil del Colegio Manuel Pardo de Chiclayo. And none of the members had any experience singing. So how in the world did they make such a classic album? And the time between them recording the first album and them learning how to sing was just a few months. And not only did the album sell just stupidly well, it just sounded good on top of that. And that was mainly thanks to the priest, Jose Maria Junquera, who was known for his perfectionism both in the performance and in the practice. And sadly, their first official performance isn't really known. What is known is that they performed across cities in the department. So, Chiclayo, Lambayaque, Pimentel, Tuman, Jongoyape, Chepen, and other places, which meant getting back home late into the night or even past dawn. Not to forget their daily practices and school. But there was merit to this, with each performance leading to more positive comments from the public, the radio, the newspaper, television, all praising the choir. And none of this story was just due to sheer fluke or chance. This was all thanks to Jose Maria Junquera's efforts and talents. But before we get any further, who exactly is Jose Maria Junquera? The priest that just appeared at a local school one day and created one of the most successful albums in Peruvian history. Jose Maria Junquera was born in 1931 in Spain, in a small town called Friera de Valverde. And his path towards priesthood began when he was 12, when he was sent to a formation seminar. And after finishing his education there, he enrolled at the University of Salamanca, where he earned a degree of licentiate in Gregorian chant. So that's where his musical skills and education came from. But soon after graduating, he was sent off to Peru at his capital, Lima. And there he met and made ties with industry people in music over several years. And everything was going pretty well for him. Then he was sent off to Chiclayo, which ties back to where the story began. But now, not even a year later, in September of 1965, he came back to Lima, but this time with 15 kids in tow. And also with a new goal, to record a Christmas album. And the thing is, no one knew that the album would blow up the way it did. There actually even wasn't a lot of funding for the trip. So the trip had to be financed by the parents of the choir, but despite that, thanks to Jose Maria's connection in the music industry, the production is beautiful, with arrangement and piano from Horacio y Castro, accompaniment by musicians from the National Symphony Orchestra. The kids were in good hands, but that didn't mean that it was easy. The recording was a harsh 2-week window, with each day starting early from around 8 a.m. and the session ending after 6 p.m. The kids stayed at a hostel where backpackers and other travelers stayed. And did I mention that they were 8 to 10 years old going through all of this? Some songs were pretty quick to record, but others had to be recorded over and over again, with Junquera's perfectionism fueling this exhausting cycle. But I would say it was completely worth it. I mean, my favorite song, without a doubt, is Noche de Paz. Especially when that one kid just starts singing that. It makes me tear up. And the other track, Aires de España, where they just start going crazy with the harmonies and Vamos Pastores Vamos. That beginning section of the kid solo, oh my god, it's so good. Straight up, in those 2 weeks, they recorded magic. And I don't think they know English or would ever even watch this video, but I just wanted to thank you guys for not just contributing to Peruvian culture overall, but to my life. But yeah, life soon returned to normal by the end of September. Practice continued, and so did the classes and local performances, but just a month later, that's when it happened. Their album was released to the public. Instantly, the best-selling album of not just Chiclayo, but Peru overall. And as one of the choir members put it, without a doubt, they had entered the history of Peruvian music. A group of 15 kids who just started to sing, and their pastor that believed in them and in their talents. And it was another whirlwind of events for the next 2 years, with even more performances, more practices, and more albums, ultimately releasing 4 albums in a 3-year window, all while balancing school and home life on top of that. But the year 1968 would also mark the beginning of the end. As I walked through the school hallways, I ran into our maestro, Jose Maria, who, after greeting me, had a brief conversation with me. During it, he offered to sell me a Herder Universal Encyclopedia. After explaining its merits and how useful it would be to me, he told me that it was very important and urgent for him to sell it. He handed me the book so I could take it home and show it to my parents so they could decide whether to buy it or not. I don't remember the price, but I understand that it was reasonable. From that moment on, the encyclopedia became my faithful companion. It represents the eternal bond between student and teacher. Purchasing that encyclopedia, which is now invaluable. But knowing the success that these records achieved, why was he not supported? Why was there such negligence in upholding authors' rights? Did capital sins maybe emerge in response to everything that was achieved? Was all the work done not properly valued? Was it perhaps assumed that it would be easy to find a replacement and just continue to work the same? Because you see, Jose Maria was now on a time limit. His parents, who were still in Spain, were growing older and were now in a position where they needed support from their son, or they ran the risk of being thrown out into the streets. So he was desperate for money by any means necessary. But another event further paints a picture of his position, but how much he still cared for the choir. One December day, the maestro came to my house to speak to my parents. The purpose wasn't to ask for permission for rehearsals or for a trip to Lima. Instead, to propose that they allow me to go with him to Lima to study on a scholarship at the Hans Christian Andersen School. The offer was made separately to each of the four of us left, and it was rejected. I understand now how difficult it must have been for a father to be separated from his child, but he later returned to make the same offer, this time for another Latin American country, but it met the same fate and it was denied. I can't help but wonder whether things would have been different if one of us had said yes. This just shows how much pressure he was under. Pressed to immediately go and save his parents from imminent abandonment that they face, and also, in one way or another, to save what he achieved through his work with the choir. But ultimately, there was nothing that could be done. Jose Maria left Chiclayo and Peru altogether, crossing the ocean to return to Spain in order to take care of his parents. Each one of the choir members continued their education and lives. And for the school, everything went on like nothing had happened. New musical directors took over new choirs, and even new records were recorded, but in the end, they made no difference. And with time, the history was just forgotten. The echoes of their voices would be heard every year in homes across Peru, but the people behind them faded into time and history. But for music so iconic, its history just can't stay forgotten forever. Half a century since its original recording, the choir reunited to celebrate their contribution to Peruvian culture for the album's 50th anniversary. And that's how the story ends. Well, as much as I'd want to end the story here, where the choir reunited, then being formally rewarded with medals and ribbons, and even getting to hear their voices one more time, there's so much more context that's needed. There was not a single celebration for any of the anniversaries of the choir's formation. Not for the 5th, 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th, nothing. And during all of that time, not a single mention or recognition from the school was expressed until the 50th anniversary. And the only reason that even happened was because the priest serving as director, who was unaware of the choir's history, kind of just threw a ceremony together because he felt pressure from the newspapers and magazines because they were covering and interviewing the members for the anniversary. And so he used a small venue which filled up in less than 10 minutes, and there they try to make up for decades of silence with diplomas and medals. And I would have liked to say that at least one positive outcome was that they hired one of the members, Luis Alberto Vergara Espinosa, to take care of his health condition and cover its costs, but that wouldn't end up mattering because they decided to not renew his contract, so now he's on his own again. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's how the story ends. How nice. They were celebrated after 50 years, but they weren't even given the proper recognition that they deserved. Just a small room for the group of men that contributed to one of Peru's great cultural cornerstones. Well, Feliz Navidad, Merry Christmas, whatever, right? Ciao.